Hello chess fans and welcome to the Amateur Chess Review. My name is Donnie Ariel. I'm a chess master, and on this channel I'm going to analyze games submitted by viewers like you with the idea of helping you improve your chess, helping you achieve better results, and focusing on what is actually going to help you achieve those results. This being the first episode, I'm going to show a game I played recently against Ben Johnson, who's the host of the Perpetual Chess podcast. Link to that in the description if you're interested. I'm about 200 points higher rated than him, about 2,400. We're both a little rusty. The point is more not our absolute ratings, but I'm trying to win, right? So I'm going to avoid variations if they seem like they're going to lead to a draw. And that's a dynamic I'm sure you're familiar with from your own games. Let's get into it. So the first opening moves are pretty normal, pretty standard. Playing the King's Indian as black, you can make a bunch of moves, usually without thinking too much, these first opening moves. Now, when I played d6, I'm planning to play my pawn to e5 next move if I get a chance. White played pawn to d4, which seems like it stops me. In a second, you'll see I can play it anyway. So I played pawn to e5, and the idea is I can take advantage of a little trick on this long diagonal. And this on the long diagonal, where we both have our bishops, is something that's going to be constantly at issue throughout this whole game. So white took it, and my plan was to move my knight. I could maybe move it to g4. I decided to move it here to d7. And the idea is I'm getting back my pawn, because if white tried to move his pawn by playing pawn takes pawn, then I would play bishop takes bishop, and I would be very happy. But of course white doesn't fall for that. White just keeps developing, and I got my pawn back. And in this position I played knight c6. Now the computer pretty strongly prefers e4. The idea is white can't play knight takes pawn because of bishop takes bishop, so white will have to move his knight. Now I think this is a good moment to point out, on this channel we are not going to dwell on what exactly precisely the computer says is the best move, unless it really matters. What we want to focus on are the critical positions and critical mistakes. So maybe e4 is a little better. Feel free to look it up with your engine. But knight c6 is a good move too. I bring out my knight, castles, pawn to e4. Same idea. If white plays knight takes pawn, I play bishop takes bishop. So white is going to have to move this knight, and he chose to move it to e1. Now my pawn's attacked, right? Bishop takes bishop. I could try to defend it with tactics for a move. I could play maybe knight c5, and I have one defender. I would still be trying to capitalize on this pin, but that wasn't my idea. I could also play the best move, which is probably f5, protecting my pawn, and I think that's what I would do if I had this position again. But my plan was actually to play pawn to e3. Now this looks like maybe a very strange move. It requires a little bit of explanation. Now, when you play a move like this in a practical game, the first thing you want to think about are the alternatives. So the most obvious one is what happened in the game, pawn takes pawn. You also need to make sure that moving forward one square or two squares is not something that you're worried about. And I wasn't, because I figured if he moved his pawn, let's say here, let's say f4, well, this is a wedge in white's position. Maybe later it could become a weakness, but for now, I'd be pretty happy, I think. Now, white played pawn takes pawn. And this is an important moment to discuss. This kind of pawn sacrifice comes up in a number of openings. It comes up, for example, if you're familiar with the perk, white sometimes plays it. I've given up a pawn, but I've kind of ruined white's structure. So these pawns are doubled, isolated pawns. They can't defend each other, and in particular, they can't attack this e5 square. So you're going to see that I played knight to e5, and the knight is pretty solid there. It's protected by another knight, by a bishop, and critically, it can't be attacked by a pawn. So for example, if white had an f-pawn, he could play pawn to f4 and have to move. That's never going to be the case in this game. But it's not all roses. First of all, when white plays pawn takes pawn, this rook is now activated. Another thing is this pawn on e3 does control the d4 square. Another thing is I used to have a pawn in the center, right? And I don't have it anymore. But this was the idea, and let's see what happens. So queen d2, c6, rook d1, and around here I started feeling like I was in trouble. you know, I wanted an off-balance game, and I got it. But the problem is, it's not so much that I'm down a pawn; it's that white is actually quite active. You see, my pieces are not totally out. I can't move my knight. Let's say I move my knight. There's a pin. I would lose my queen, and if rook takes queen, rook takes rook. So I'm a little constrained here, and I should probably just play queen e7, trying to get out of this pin. But I felt like things were not going well, and I wanted to start making some threats, trying to get some fear into my opponent. Usually that's a good idea. If you're higher rated and you start to make threats, your opponent may doubt themselves, especially if they have to calculate tactical variations. They're going to be worried about betting the whole game on that. What if you've seen one move farther? So I played bishop h6. Now, this is not a good move. So in this case, I was trying to make threats, but I probably should have just played queen e7. White played knight e4, and now we see a drawbacks of this pawn move c6. The idea of this move c6, right, was to control the d5 square. White can't move his knight there, can't move his bishop there, and his bishop kind of bites on granite here, right? c6 is protected by a pawn. But I've given this d6 square, and it's pretty awkward. f6 could also be an issue with my bishop over here. Also, a major problem is that this diagonal can be weak, right? White has his bishop on this long diagonal. My bishop is moved. Maybe the queen is going to come and form a battery on this long diagonal. So things are not looking too good. The computer thinks I'm minus 2.7, which is a pretty big advantage for white. But in chess, you got to go for it. So I played queen e7, and white played knight c2. And this knight c2 is actually a very strong move because it does two very important things. One, it defends e3, and the second thing it does is it prepares bishop a3, which is very, very annoying for me because my queen and rook are on the same diagonal. And here I really didn't know what to do. I had the feeling that I was more or less busted, and that happens a lot in chess. If you look at games people play, the advantage swings back and forth, and just because you're doing badly in a position doesn't mean you have to lose the game. I decided to play f5 and to lash out, and white played queen to d6, which wasn't the best move and is pretty surprising. I say it's surprising not because white had knight d6, which was also probably a better alternative than queen d6, and we'll see what happened in the game after queen d6, but rather white could play bishop a3. Now, obviously, I saw this before I played f5, right? You have to look at moves that might win the game for your opponent immediately. Those are the most important moves to look at. So here, believe it or not, the computer says just move the queen, let white play bishop takes rook, and continue the game, but that's a big, big advantage for white, pretty much a decisive advantage. I was planning to play c5, but black is pretty much busted. I think that white didn't play this in the game, maybe he didn't see this, because my move, pawn to f5, has actually made this situation much worse for me. If we go back and we imagine I play a move like a6 or a5, like some move that doesn't do anything, white could play bishop a3, and I'll play c5, and don't get me wrong, I'm still more or less busted here, but it's not as bad as if my pawn is on f5, because with my pawn on f5, this diagonal to my king is open, and that means that there's going to be check by the queen, there's always going to be tactics, it's actually even stronger. So that's my guess why he didn't play bishop a3. He had a plan, he thought it was going to be a strong plan, and it was better for him, and he didn't reevaluate after my move f5. Let's take a look at bishop a3, c5. There are a lot of moves here. The computer's preferred move is queen d6. The point being, I can't take the knight because of queen takes queen, but if I take the queen, then you save the knight, and this is extremely good for white. This bishop is now very, very strong on this long diagonal, right? Used to be biting on granite when this pawn was back here. Not anymore. Now it's hitting this very sensitive point. And don't forget, I'm down a pawn. And what do I have as compensation? Nothing. In fact, I haven't even completed my development. Let's just take a look at one sample line. In the game, what did I see? I saw, well, after queen d5 check, I could go here. And I was hoping I would have some tricks with this e3 square falling. So, for example, in this position, white could play knight c5. This is just a sample line. It's not necessarily the best moves for both sides, but it gives you an idea of what would be going on. king moves. I'm not going to want to take it. Let's see if I take it. He's going to take it with his bishop, right? He's attacking my queen, attacking my rook. But I could, in this position, I could move my knight. And let's say queen d3, which is the move the computer likes. Well, now we get to kind of a composition, but I'm down a pawn and I'm worse, right? So that's not very good. I haven't achieved anything. White has this very strong bishop. If I trade queens, I'm going to be down a pawn in an ending. Let's say he takes with the pawn. This would even be a passed pawn. So I'm in a lot of trouble, although the game would continue. Definitely not going to be anywhere close to resigning, but I'm going to have to find some swindles here. So the fact that I had this trick on e3, I'm relying on it not so much because I saw that it worked, but because I'm kind of desperate. Now, f5, queen d6. And I guess this is a good moment to, again, point out, if you make threats, you put your opponent under pressure, they are usually not going to find the right response. If you were playing Magnus Carlsen, that may not be the case, but if your opponents have many options, especially many good-looking options, there's a good chance they won't play the right one. So why did I breathe a sigh of relief? Well, because I knew I had this move, queen e8, which might look pretty stupid since I'm moving backwards, but the point is, white has put his queen in the middle of my position. Now, it could be very powerful there, but if I can knock it back, then maybe it will not be powerful. Maybe it'll just get pushed around. And in this position, this knight, which was defended by the trick, right? It's defended by this little tactical trick that if I take the queen, you save the knight. I can't take the knight because you take the queen. Well, now something has to happen with this knight. It's got to move. So it plays knight c5. And now I played what I was planning, knight f7. And we'll see that this is a good move for a couple reasons, maybe more so as the game goes on. One thing is I'm attacking the queen, so that's a tempo, right? And where's the queen going to go? Well, it's got to go somewhere, right? And it's got to go somewhere that defends this knight so that I don't play knight takes knight. By the way, there's a critical little point to notice here, that if white were to play knight takes knight, it looks like, oh, if I take his queen, maybe you could play this fork check, but I would just take it, rook takes knight. Well, that seems super obvious, but the reason that it's important to have noticed that is that in this position, before black plays knight takes queen, right, the rook is not defending the f6 square. So that's kind of a move you could overlook, just something to notice. So white has to move the queen. He moves it back to d4, and I play other knight to e5. So I do have this e5 square, and sometimes in the King's Indian, it can hold your position together, even just having that one critical central square. White played a strange move in this position. I'm guessing that it was directed at stopping my knight from going to g4. He played bishop f3. I'm guessing it was directed at stopping this move, the idea being that I would now be trying to gang up on this pawn with knight, bishop, and queen. But there's a problem here, and the problem is, again, that there's this tension on the long diagonal. And again, who is it good for? Well, if I'm pinned, if this knight can't move because somehow queen in somewhere is going to be checkmate, then it's probably good for white. Although notice that right now, I have the g7 square defended, and this knight defends the h8 square. So if I were to move this knight, not recommending this move, just for illustration, queen can't come in here, and it can't come in here. So what do I play? Well, what I should have played is bishop g7. And this would be a very strong move, because I am now threatening to play knight takes f3 check, right, with check, and then I'm going to take the queen. Believe it or not, the computer says that the best move is to play bishop g2, but that is a queen sacrifice, because I can play knight f3 check anyway. Even though I'm not getting the bishop, I am getting the queen. And it says this position is better for black by about one pawn or so. And I certainly would rather be black, but the alternative would be to lose a piece for nothing, and that is because in this position, let's say that white were to play king h1, well, now I play bishop h8. And it's very important to have this bishop on h8 and not on g7, because when it's sitting here, I can't move this knight, right? If I play knight takes bishop, that is a big mistake. This is checkmate. The queen has a guard. Game over. But not so. Oh, and let's go back to, let's see, this position. If he plays king h1, I'm saying I'll play bishop h8. Not so in this position, right? Now the bishop is guarded, so this knight can move, and I'm threatening to play simply knight takes bishop. My bishop on h8 is guarded, so just to make the point, definitely don't play this move for white. I would take on f3. I'm attacking the queen. The queen can't take my bishop because it has a guard, right? So what could white do in this position to avoid losing a piece? Well, he's got to get off this long diagonal, because on this diagonal I'm threatening to take the bishop on f3, and I'm also simply threatening to say, let's say, again, just purely for illustration, a3, some other wasted move. If I just move my knight away, my bishop attacks the queen. Where can the queen go? Wherever it goes, I play bishop takes bishop. So white could try to get out of this, maybe with a move like queen f4, but the problem is that the queen doesn't have a lot of squares. So just g5, and what are you going to do now? Right? Can't take this pawn, it's protected. Can't take this pawn, it's protected. So you're going to be coming back to d4, and that's not going to work out very well. But let's go back to the game, because I did not play the right move. Instead of playing bishop g7, I didn't have a lot of time left, neither did my opponent, and I wanted to drive white back, and I wanted to make some moves. So I played b6, knight d3, and now I played bishop g7. But here there's a critical difference. The difference is this bishop is actually defended now, right? So when I move my knight and take something, it's not as powerful, because this bishop has a guard. So in this position, white played king h1. I can't play knight takes bishop because it's checkmate. So let me try the same thing that I was saying is good last time. Bishop h8. Still a good move, but it's not as powerful because this bishop is now defended by the knight on d3. So if we look at the game, queen h4, right? If this knight wasn't defending the bishop, then I could play knight takes bishop, which is, by the way, a good move here anyway, maybe even the best move, but it doesn't win a piece, right? Because it's defended. This was probably a good position for black. I could maybe about equal. I could play c5, and the fact that I'm down a pawn is not that big a deal because this bishop is going to be very strong. Notice that when it comes to this square, again, I'll make a wasted move for white just for illustration. This is a little tender. If this pawn was back here, much different, much better for white than having the pawn here, because this is f3 is now totally a weakness. Okay, let's see how the game went. Queen h4, and so I played bishop b7. I should have taken this bishop on f3, and each move I should take it, and each move he should move it away. Bishop a1. Now the point of bishop a1 is to get the bishop on a defended square. Right? So the tricks don't work. But probably better than bishop a1 was save this light squared bishop, bishop g2. Okay, bishop f6. So here I don't know what to do really. We're both very low on time. I know that I want to make some moves. I want to make some threats if I can. And I want to be careful not to lose right away. And I also want to be careful not to play too slow. Because in chess, if you run out of time, you lose. And it doesn't matter how good your position is. So you got to move. Queen e7, e4. Strategically, e4 is a good move in that if you exchange your doubled pawn for my pawn, generally that's an improvement. In this position, I wouldn't be thinking too much about making strategically strong moves because there's just too many tactics. Not saying that this is a bad move. Computer slightly prefers something else, but again, these slight differences are not a huge deal. So e4. c5. Again, I could take the bishop, takes. Pawn takes pawn. Well, now finally I take it. And I didn't really see anything else to do, and I had to start moving quickly. And now we get to a funny position. Queen's attacked, and where's it going to go? Well, I played queen e3. And it's funny, I played rook f3, and both me and Ben, I talked to him about it after the game, we both thought this was a crushing blow. And when I played this, I felt very good. Felt like I had played a crushing move. And I think it's because there are heuristics in chess in that some kinds of moves are often crushing. And so when you play them, you think, wow, it might be crushing here. But actually, this is not crushing at all. White can just take it. Now, I don't want to play bishop takes rook because queen takes bishop, and I'm just down a piece, right? But what I can do, what I can do after rook takes pawn, rook takes, is I could take this queen first, knight takes, I take the rook, and it's about equal. Maybe black's a little better. I mean, I would certainly play on. I would try to find some tricks, but this is not crushing. This is like more like a draw, right? So luckily, we were both confused. He played queen e3. I played rook takes f3, and he had the feeling it was crushing. I think because after queen takes queen, I have this move, double check and mate. Check from the rook, check from the bishop. So what did he do? Well, he played queen takes, and after this, the game was over because I had a couple of crushing queen moves. I could play queen e4, queen e2, which is what I did, attacking the knight, attacking the rook. He moved over, and probably the best move is actually rook to d8, and then to d2 with this battery, and then queen takes h2 is going to be mate. But I played queen d2, and I played this because we both had very little time, maybe about 10 seconds, plus 5 seconds added per move. I saw that this was winning the knight, and I knew that in the resulting position, let's say he saves his rook and I take the knight, I knew that I would be able to play many moves quickly without thinking, getting the 5 seconds, and I wouldn't have any risk of not winning the game. But definitely rook d8 to d2 looks good, and I think that's the best way to play. I hope you enjoyed this game. I really want to encourage you to send me your games because I would rather look at your games than my games. You can send them to chessreview@protonmail.com. You can see that email address in the profile. You could also post the game as a comment if you want. And just let us know the ratings of the players and the time control. Thank you.